Trying to see if it's recording. Oh dear. Yes, it is recording. Okay. All right, let's start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so today we will be reading through some verses from the Therigatha, and the particular verse that we will cover today is was composed by one of the female disciples of the Buddha that lived during his time. And her story is quite famous, so some of us may have heard of her and her story one time or another during our studies. And she is Kisa Gotami. Her name was Kisa Gotami. And she was known as the mother with the dead child. So we will run through the story first. So this is available on Access to Insight. So we will run through the story first just to give a bit of a background, who she is, where she came from, what happened to her, and then we will read through some of the verses from the Therigatha, which she wrote. So Kisa Gotami, the mother with the dead child. There lived in Savatthi a girl called Gotami in poor circumstances, belonging to the lowest caste. So in India those days, during the Buddha time, there were many caste systems. And Gotami, as a girl, was born into the lowest of all castes. So before she was very thin, because she was very thin and haggard, a real being poke, very thin, everyone called her the haggard Gotami. So here, Kisa is translated as haggard. So when one saw her walking around, tall and thin, one could not fathom her inner riches. One could truly say her beauty was an inner one. One could not see its spark outside. Okay, so she was born like that and she grew up like that. And she was despondent because due to her poverty and lack of attractiveness, she was unable to find a husband. But one day, it suddenly happened that a rich merchant who appreciated her inner wealth and considered that more important than her outer appearance, married her. Okay, so this man is rich, recognized that she truly had beautiful character inside, even despite her appearance, so he chose to marry her. However, the husband's family despised her because of her caste, her poverty, and her looks. This animosity caused her great unhappiness, especially because of her beloved husband, who found himself in conflict between love for his parents and love for his wife. But when Kisa Gotami gave birth to a baby boy, the husband's whole clan finally accepted her as the mother of the son and heir. Her relief about this changed attitude was immense, and a great burden was taken from her. So you can imagine, during the old days when especially a woman does not have, a place out, say within the household, a strong dependence on the husband, and the fact that she was also of low caste, the lowest caste, and the fact that she was not pretty or attractive. So it seemed like she was already disadvantaged a lot. And the fact that she was born, although her husband loved her, the rest of the family was very averse to her. And so finally, if you think about it, in that kind of a setting, when she finally gave birth to a baby boy, and of course having a baby boy in the family is really quite an important thing, because a boy is seen as, they will be the heir to the her husband, who is a rich merchant. So you can imagine how her life had kind of changed from being very despondent and miserable to suddenly of happiness. So now she was totally happy and contented. The boy grew up and soon started playing outside, full of energy and joy. However, one day her happiness showed itself to be based on an illusion. Her little son died suddenly. She did not know how to bear this tragedy. Beyond the usual love of a mother for her child, she had been especially attached to this child because he was the guarantee for her marital bliss and her peace of mind. So you can imagine how suddenly her life was transformed into something that's totally happy and joyful. And then overnight, all of a sudden, it went worse, backwards. His death made her fear that her husband's family would despise her again and that they would blame her, saying she was karmically unable to have a son. Kisa Gotami must have done some very despicable deeds to have this happen to her, people would say. And even her husband might reject her now. All such ideas and imaginings revolved in her mind, and a dark cloud descended upon her. She simply refused to accept the fact that the child was dead and became obsessed with the fantasy that her child was only sick and that she had to get medicine for him. So here we need to understand how it's not as simple as a woman with a dead child. There's much more to it. She came from a very difficult background where she thought it was, going to be a very miserable life till she died, until this rich merchant came along. But then that didn't solve the problem. It created a whole bunch of other problems. And so when she finally gave birth to a baby boy, she thought, well, all her problems from the time she was a little girl till now would disappear and she would finally be happy. But then all of a sudden, her son died. And then she realized, oh no, now it's going to be even worse than before. And when we look at all these and take all this into account, it's difficult for us to imagine what could have gone on in her mind. The fact that, as a mother losing their only child, that kind of grief is already difficult to go through. But taking into account where she came from and what she had gone through in her life before her son came about, the grief and the what was going on in her mind must have been even more, much grief, much suffering. So with the dead child in her arms, she ran away from her home and went from house to house, asking for medicine for her little son. At every door, she begged, please give me some medicine for my child. But the people replied that medicine would not help anymore because the child was dead. But she did not understand what they were saying to her because in her mind, she had resolved that the child was not dead. So you see, in her mind, her child is her ticket to happiness after all that she had gone through up till that point in her life. And for that ticket to suddenly be taken away from her, she couldn't accept it. And so she was resolved in her mind, it was like, no way that this child of mine is dead. This ticket to happiness, in her mind. However, obviously people could not understand and see where she was coming from and how her mind state was. And others laughed at her without compassion. But amongst the many selfish and unsympathetic people, she also met a wise and kind person who recognized that her mind was deranged because of grief. So grief, in the most serious form, can actually, it can be quite It can creep on someone. It can hide. It can manifest. That was what I was looking for. It can manifest without the person knowing if they're not careful. And so here, Kisa Gotami was lucky enough that she met someone who was both wise and kind, who recognized that, did not laugh at her, and he advised her to visit the best physician, namely the Buddha of the 10 powers, who would know the right remedy. So he did not say to her that, oh, the Buddha will help you get you out of your grief. He didn't say that. So he positioned the Buddha as like a physician, a doctor, and said, oh, the Buddha will have the right medicine for what you need. So she immediately followed this advice and ran to Prince Jeta's grove, Anathapindika's monastery. So here is the setting that commonly used in a lot of sutras. And this is a time when Buddha was staying in Jeta's grove, and that was donated by the rich merchant Anathapindika. So this is where the Buddha was staying. And she arrived in the middle of the discourse, being given by the Buddha to a large congregation. So she arrived right in the middle of when Buddha was giving a discourse, talking, giving a sutta. Totally despairing and in tears, with the corpse of the child in her arms, she begged the Buddha, Master, give me medicine for my son. The awakened one interrupted his teaching and replied kindly that he knew of a medicine. So here it's this story has a lot of significance. It shows how the Buddha is not only wise in terms of as a teacher, he's very compassionate, and also he had that knowledge that Buddhas have. So he has the power to see if and when a student comes along, whether they're ready to receive the teachings and what sort of teachings will be right at that time for their particular mind state. So the Buddha didn't answer in a way that says, something like, excuse me, your son is dead already, blah, blah, blah. And these are the teachings that can help you, for example. The Buddha actually said differently. The Buddha said, oh, yep, I know of a medicine that will help you. So hopeful, she inquired what that could be. Mustard seeds, the enlightened one replied, astounding everyone present. So this made Kisa Gotami hopeful. She was like, oh, mustard seeds. Joyfully, Kisa Gotami inquired where she should go obtain them and what kind to get. So those of you who know, grow up in India, been to India, live in India, you know that mustard seeds are very common, I think. Please, those who dial in, please correct me if I'm wrong. And so that's why Kisa Gotami was very hopeful, because she was like, oh, mustard seeds, yeah, I should be able to get them. Then the Buddha replied that she need only bring us very small quantity from any house, but with one condition. That house must be where no one in that household had died. That's the condition. So the Buddha said, okay, you can bring me some mustard seeds from any household, but that household must not have someone who had died. So she trusted the Blessed One's words and went to the town. At the first house, she asked whether any mustard seeds were available. Certainly, was the reply. Could I have a few seeds? She inquired. Of course, she was told, and some seeds were brought to her. But then she asked the second question, which she had not deemed quite as important. So she didn't think that the second question, the condition that the Buddha gave, was of any significance. So she asked whether anyone had died in this house. But of course, the people told her. And so it went everywhere. In one house, someone had died recently. In another house, some time ago. So it ended up that she couldn't find any house where no one had died. And the dead ones are more numerous than the living ones, she was told. Towards the evening, she finally realized that not only she was stricken by the death of a loved one, but this was the common human fate. What no words had been able to convey to her, her own experience, going from door to door, made clear to her. She understood the law of existence, the being fettered to the always recurring deaths. In this way, the Buddha was able to heal her obsession and bring her to an acceptance of reality. Kisa Gotami no longer refused to believe that her child was dead, but understood that death is the destiny of all beings. Such were the means by which the Buddha could heal grief-stricken people and bring them out of their overpowering delusion, in which the whole world was perceived only in the perspective of their loss. So those of us who have, lost a family member, whether a parent, a grandparent, a sibling or an extended family, or even very good friends, will know that during the grief process, sometimes it's almost like we're in a different world at that point. And that's in a way part of that grieving process. So we have to kind of recognize, with mindfulness, recognize that it's possible that we are in the grieving process, which is what the Buddha explained. Yeah, and by recognizing that and by practicing the 6 Rs, then that will help at least cushion that a little bit and hopefully help us overcome it sooner. So in which the whole world was perceived only in the perspective. Yeah, so when we're in the grief process, sometimes we can only perceive it, that loss, and that overtakes everything else. And that's why it feels as though we're in a different world at that particular mind state. Okay. So once when someone was lamenting the death of his father, the Buddha asked him which father he meant, the father of this life, or the father of the last life, the previous life, or the one before that. Because if one wanted to grieve, then it would be just as well not only to feel sorrow for that particular one father. So that's an interesting thought, or food for thought. So another time a grief-stricken person was able to see reality was when the Buddha pointed out to him that his son would be reborn and that he would only be lamenting on an empty shell. Okay. So after Kisa Gotami had come to her senses, she took the child's lifeless body to the cemetery, buried it, and returned to the enlightened one. He asked her whether she had brought back any mustard seeds. She gratefully explained how she had been cured by the Blessed One. Thereupon the master spoke the following verse to her. So this DHP means Dhammapada. So this is a verse in the Dhammapada. In flocks and children finding delight, with a mind clinging, just such a man, death seizes and carries away as a great flood a sleeping village. So based on my understanding, what this is trying to say is, in a kind of sometimes day-to-day life, we get carried away with mind clinging to this and that. And we never know, death may come at any time. And how it comes and how quickly it comes, we never know. just as a great flood carries away a sleeping village. So a sleeping village is quiet, peaceful, and all of a sudden a great flood comes or a tsunami comes, for example, and just sweeps away the sleeping, peaceful village. So this is the description that the Buddha gave on how swift it can come. So because her mind had matured and she had one insight into reality, it was possible for her to become a stream winner after hearing the Buddha proclaim just that one verse. So it's interesting in this story how the Buddha had the wisdom to see how he could help her and what he could expound at that time, the mind state that she was in, with just one verse that enabled her to become a stream winner, which is Sotapan. And she asked for admittance into the order of the nuns. So by that time, the order of the nuns was already established, I presume. And after having spent some time as a nun, practicing and studying Dhamma, she watched her lamp one evening and compared the restlessly hissing flames with the ups and downs of life and death. So she was just looking at the oil lamp and how the flames were just dancing up and down, and she reflected that as how life and death is. And thereupon the Blessed One came to her and again spoke a short word. Though one should live 100 years, not seeing the deathless state, yet better is life for a single day, seeing the deathless state. And this is from the Dhammapada. And when she heard these lines, so her mind state was ready, and the Buddha knew that, and that's why the Buddha came to her at that point. And when she heard these lines, she was able to shed all fetters and became one of the arhats, the fully enlightened ones. Now here in the commentaries, gave a little bit an extension of her story. So 92 aeons ago, so one aeon, and again, those of you who dialed in, please correct me if I'm wrong. From memory, one aeon is the expansion and contraction of the universe. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong. So 92 aeons ago, you can imagine how long ago that was. In one of her former lives, she had been the wife of a Buddha to be at the time of the Buddha Pusa. So there was a Buddha by the name of Pusa, might have pronounced that wrong, sorry. My Pali isn't the best. So during the time of Buddha Pusa, there was a Buddha to be. That means like a bodhisattva. And she had been the wife of that Buddha to be. And during the time of the last Buddha, before the stage of the Sakya, so the Buddha before the current Buddha, Buddha Gotama. So before was Buddha Kassapa. And during that time, she had been a king's daughter who became a nun. So here it's quite interesting to know that, you know, in some of her previous former lives, there were already seeds planted in this aspect. And that was also, that could have been one of the conditions where she was able to train her mind, and the Buddha was able to recognize exactly when the conditions were right for her to receive certain teachings and then gain enlightenment. So in the collection of the verses of the Elder Nuns, so this is actually a good accurate translation of Therigatha verses. So excuse me, earlier I said poems or songs. Actually, the correct translation is, or the more accurate translation is verses. So in the collection of verses of the Elder Nuns, her stanzas can be found in which she describes the great joy the Buddha imparted to her. Therefore, she praises friendship with the noble and holy ones. So this is from the Therigatha 213-215, which we shall hop over to. The sage has emphasized, so the sage here is the Buddha, the sage has emphasized and praised noble friendship for the world. If one stays with a noble friend, even a fool will become a wise person. Stay with them of good heart, for the wisdom of those who stay with them grows. And while one is staying with them, from every kind of dukkha, one is freed. Dukkha, one should know well, and how dukkha arises and ceases, and the Eightfold Path, and the Four Noble Truths. So it's a very short verse here that Kisa Gotami explained, yeah? But it does highlight a couple of main teachings that we see again and again in the text here and there, everywhere. So the first one is in terms of noble friendship, people that we keep in our circle. And a couple of times, I think there was some suttas where the Venerable Ananda asked the Buddha, how important was it to have good friends and noble companionship? And the Buddha asked Venerable Ananda what he thought, and Venerable Ananda said, well, I think that having a noble companionship or good friendship it forms half of the practice. And then the Buddha corrected him and said, no, Venerable Ananda, actually it forms the whole of the friendship. And here it's interesting because here Kisa Gotami says that even one stays with a noble friend, even a fool will become a wise person. So even someone who, in this case, when we say wise person, recall Bhante Vimalaramsa used to say, when we see the word wisdom, it's like a keyword that indicates understanding the dependent origination. So here what Kisa Gotami is trying to explain is that even a fool, someone who doesn't understand it, if they stay with a noble person who understands it, they will become someone who understands it at some point in time. And here she also said, stay with them of good heart. So if we have companions or friends that are of our good nature, they have a good heart, for the wisdom of those who stay with them grows. So if we stay with them, then our wisdom will also grow. And while one is staying with them, from every kind of dukkha, one is freed. So this is quite interesting, because it's like if we are very careful with whom we keep close to us, friends, companions, if we are very careful and we choose them wisely, then as we continue that way, we are freed from every kind of dukkha. And here she reminded us, dukkha one should know well. We should know how dukkha arises and ceases. And that is true. Understanding how the Noble Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths work. So basically, the cause of suffering and the cessation of suffering leads to the cessation of suffering, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. Now I'm just going to hop over to this page. Yeah, okay, which is a translation of the Therigatha, the same Therigatha. Okay, and so I will skip the introduction. Which you can read. Just trying to find, yeah. Yeah. So here's a different translation, but it's the verse is a little bit longer. So 213 to 223. So PTS stands for Pali Text Society, by the way. So let's read through. Having admirable friends has been praised by the sage with reference to the world. Associating with an admirable friend, even a fool becomes wise. People of integrity should be associated with. In that way, discernment grows. Associating with people of integrity, one would be released from all suffering and stress. With no stress, the origination of stress, cessation of stress, and the Noble Eightfold Path, and the Four Noble Truths. So here, dukkha had been translated as simply stress. Yeah, but dukkha actually is, pain, lamentation, grief, sorrow, etc., etc. Yeah, so all that comes under the umbrella of dukkha. Okay, stressful, painful is the woman's state. So says the tamer of tameable people. Being a co-wife is painful. Some, on giving birth once, slit their throats. Others, of delicate constitution, take poison. In the midst of a breech birth, both mother and child suffer destruction, so die. So here she's explaining how, as a woman, the process of giving birth itself is a very painful one, and sometimes here she talks about the different occasions where it could lead to death, or miserable death, actually, miserable death. Going along, about to give birth, I saw my husband dead. Okay. So this one was actually from Patacara. I shouldn't have skipped this. My bad. So let me go back to the translator's introduction. I shouldn't have skipped the translator's introduction. So my bad. So let me read through the Thanissaro Bhikkhu's introduction before I read the verses. Then it will make more sense. So I'll run through very quickly the story of Kisa Gotami because we had talked about it. So Kisa Gotami has two of the most heartrending stories in the Buddhist tradition associated with her name. The commentary to this verse tells that when her young child had died, she refused to believe it was dead. After asking many people in vain for medicine that would revive the child, she was finally directed to the Buddha. When she told him her story, he offered to provide medicine for the child, but he would need some mustard seed, which is the cheapest Indian spice, obtained from a family in which no one had died. So she went from house to house asking for mustard seed, and no one refused to give it to her. But when she asked if anyone had died in the family, the universal response was always, oh, yes, of course. And after a while, the message sunk in, death is universal. On abandoning the child's body to a charnel ground, she returned to the Buddha and asked to be ordained as a nun, and afterwards became an arahant. So that's a very quick summary of what we just read earlier. So the canonical verses associated with Kisa Gotami's name, however, tells a different story, which is identical to the story that the commentary attributes to Patacara. So Patacara was another woman, also during the Buddha's time. Now, her story was even more sad. Okay, so Patacara, so pregnant with her second child, she was returning to her parents' home along with her husband and small firstborn child to give birth. But along the way, a great storm blew up and she asked her husband to provide shelter. So as he was cutting grass and sticks to build a shelter, a snake bit him and he died from that snake bite. So unsheltered and wondering at her husband's long absence, so she didn't know that her husband had died, but her husband had died when he was trying to collect the grass and sticks to build a shelter because of the great storm coming. So while unsheltered and wondering at her husband's long absence, Patacara gave birth to a second child and had to spend the night sheltering both her children against the rain and wind with nothing more than her body. So it was really quite a difficult situation. The next morning, she found her husband dead. And distraught, she decided to return to her parents' home. However, a river, so there was a river because of the storm the night before, swollen from the rain of the previous night, ran across her way. So unable to carry both her children, so she had her firstborn and she just gave birth to her second one the night before. So unable to carry both children across the river at the same time, she left her firstborn on the near bank and waded through the raging current, carrying her baby. So placing her baby on the far bank, she turned back to fetch her firstborn. However, a hawk, seeing the baby, took it for a piece of flesh and swooped down on it. And seeing this, Patacara raised her hand, so she tried to chase it away, but to no avail. The hawk picked up the baby and carried it off. Meanwhile, her firstborn, seeing, his mother was raising her hands trying to chase the hawk away, took it for a signal to cross the river. So of course, as he jumped into the, this is a small child, and he jumped into the raging current, he was carried off to his grief. Overwhelmed by grief, Patacara returned to her parents' home, only to realize that it had been burned down from a lightning strike in the previous night storm. And her parents and brother were at the moment being cremated on a single pyre. So you can imagine that over the span of just 2 days, she had lost her entire family, including extended family. So she lost her husband when he was trying to look for, build a shelter, lost her newborn baby who was carried off by a hawk, lost her firstborn as he taught her, his mother called him to cross the river, went to her parents' home, and then found that both her parents and her brother died overnight because their house was burned down from a lightning strike. So you can imagine that her kind of mind state, at this point, she went mad. Yeah. So her story probably, actually it's difficult to tell which is worse. Yeah. In both instances, these two women went through immense grief, immense suffering. So at this point, Patacara went mad and began wandering around half naked. And only on coming into the Buddha's presence did she recover her senses. He taught her the Buddhama, and eventually she ordained and became an arhat. Why this story is attributed to Patacara in the commentary when it is obviously Kisa Gotami's in the canon is hard to tell. Some scholars have suggested that the tales in the Pali commentaries were important from the other Buddhist traditions. So here the scholars are kind of like, debating between these two stories and how they are linked to the verses. Thus, the differences between the canonical verses and the commentarial tales stem from the fact that the different traditions attributed particular stories to different elder monks and nuns. So, for instance, the Pali canon attributed the story of the woman whose family was destroyed in a single day to Kisa Gotami, while the tradition from which the commentary drew attributed it to Patacara. Okay, so you can read all this yourself. But in any case, why I jumped back to this was because sometimes when I came to this verse, it sounded like this verse is not coming from Kisa Gotami, but from Patacara. And that's what the Thanisaro Bhikkhu was trying to point towards, what the Pali canon is saying, what the commentaries are saying, and what the debate is, okay? But anyway, if you look at this verse, you will understand that most likely it sounds like it was in reference to a Patacara story. So going along, about to give birth, I saw my husband dead. Giving birth in the road, I hadn't reached my own home. 2 children deceased. my husband dead in the road, miserable me. My mother, father, and brother were burning on a single pyre. Your family all gone, miserable. You've suffered pain without measure. Your tears have flowed for many thousands of lives. Then I saw, the mist of the charnel ground, the muscles of sons being chewed, with family killed, despised by all, my husband dead, I reached the deathless. I developed this path, noble eightfold, going to the deathless. Having realized unbinding, I gazed in the mirror of Dharma. I cut out the arrow, put down the burden, done the task. I, Kisa Gotami Theri, my heart well released, have said this. So here you can see why there is this discussion going on, and feel free to read it by yourself. Yeah. So I'm not sure if this was useful today because it's a bit of an experiment. So a couple of things here that were touched upon. Okay. So I'm opening. Okay. Yeah. Oh, thanks for the comment. Hi. So this was a reading from the Therigatha with some commentaries just to set the stage. Was there any, are there any questions of any, or if anyone would like to share their thoughts? So particularly two sad stories, I didn't mean to, verses came to be. So was that useful? So if there are no, yeah, makes one wonder how connected everyone is. You know, sometimes, well, a nice way to think of things is, and this helps in the practice, because then it gives a different perspective of how we practice and how we need not take ourselves too seriously or to take anything too personally, is that at any one time, um, or events or anything that happens, it's all due to conditions. And as we all know, conditions arise and conditions fall away and conditions change. And that's how the three characteristics are. They're governed the characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta. So of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and the impersonal nature of everything. And the underlying teaching behind all this really is the dependent origination or the dependent co-arising. And the tools, if you may, that the Buddha had gifted us really to help us be able to maneuver our way around the way, everything works around us, which is governed by the three characteristics. The tools are really the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the path that leads to the cessation of dukkha. And right at the center of that path is right effort, which Bhante Vimalaramsi has very cleverly simplified it, if you may, into the 6 R's. And with this tool, really, as long as we continue to sincerely practice it, as how Mrs. Manjulaji explained in one of our previous sessions, the key thing is really not to be too tight about the practice or not to take oneself too seriously, But so long as we understand the teachings, ask questions if we do not, in order to clarify our understanding, and continue to practice daily with sincerity, then we should feel relieved in a way that we are doing the right thing in walking down the right path. And as we read in the verse earlier by Kisa Gotami, that having good companionship, even if we don't have noble ones as companionship, at least having good, kind, and wise people around us, that makes a lot of difference to have that kind of support when we continue down this path. Okay, so I hope that was useful. And if there are no questions, then let us share merits. So I am going to, give me one sec, I will share my screen. Sharing of merits, here we go. Share. Okay. So let us come together and share the merits together. May suffering ones be suffering, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, that really wraps up today. So I hope it was useful to everyone who dialed in, and I hope it will be useful to anyone who listens to this recording. So thank you very much. I wish everyone a very good week ahead. Stay happy, stay healthy, keep smiling, keep practicing your 6 Rs. Bye-bye.